But K-File's extensive reporting now shows the two shared a close social circle for nearly 2 decades, from private jet flights to high-profile parties, and that's only part of the story. Photos, flight logs, and court records help reveal how long their personal history really was. K-File's Andrew Kaczynski is here with all of that. And it is some extensive research and reporting that you all did. You've chronicled this relationship between Trump and Epstein from the 80s to mid-2000s is obviously when their contact probably cut off. What's the most striking thing that you find that kind of contradicts this? Donald Trump is no fan of Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, so what we found, it really actually paints a portrait starting, as you said, in the 1980s up to the mid-2000s. It paints this portrait of a long, enduring friendship. I think there were several associates who have called them best friends. Epstein himself said that he was Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years. And we looked through these hundreds of hours of video, hundreds of photos.
What just happened is staggering. The skeletons in Donald Trump's closet are rattling so violently right now that no amount of political theater can drown out the noise. Here at the Midas Touch Network, we refuse to let the smoke and mirrors work. We're not falling for the distractions or the sudden policy announcements.
We went through documents from court files, exhibits from lawsuits. So we really chronicled this whole relationship through time. And one thing that I found really interesting was these flight logs from Epstein's private jet, which were part of that investigation into Ghislaine Maxwell. And they really tell you a story of how close these guys are. Look at just a few of them. This is in 1993, for instance. This is the same year that we found as well that Jeffrey Epstein attended Donald Trump's wedding to Marla Maples. Trump flew on that plane 4 times with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell between Palm Beach, where Mar-a-Lago is, and where Epstein also owns a home. Let's fast forward then to 1994. Trump flew from Palm Beach to Washington, D.C.
The manufactured outrage cycles are designed to pull your attention away from what's actually happening, because what's actually happening is this. Donald Trump's deeply disturbing history with Jeffrey Epstein is clawing its way back into the spotlight, and the timing couldn't be more significant for him. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight for years.
In August 1995, just he and Eric were on board with Epstein and Maxwell. Again, they flew from Palm Beach to Teterboro in New Jersey. And then in January 1997, Trump flew with the pair from Palm Beach to Newark, New Jersey. All of these trips, 8 in total, were documented in logs that I'd mentioned were from that trial.
You also took a look at what Donald Trump himself has said about Jeffrey Epstein. What did you find?
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things that's always been so striking is that quote that he said in 2002 that we found in that New York Magazine article where he said he was a terrific guy, he liked beautiful women just like him. And then that quote where he says he likes many of them on the younger side.
But now the walls are closing in, and the people who promised transparency are suddenly getting very quiet, very evasive, and very creative with their excuses. Let me take you through what we definitively know. Not speculation, not conspiracy theories, but documented facts that exist in the public record. The Epstein files that have seen daylight contain Donald Trump's name repeatedly. We're not talking about passing mentions or peripheral associations. Trump appears in the sworn deposition testimony of Epstein's sex trafficking victims.
That was from an article entitled Jeffrey Epstein, International Money Man of Mystery in New York Magazine. Now, just 2 years later, we were going through Donald Trump's book, and there he had one called How to Get Rich. And then we wrote in his book that somebody named Mysterious Jeffrey had called him, and that you could see it right there. That's the passage from his book. He says Jeffrey calls in, but there's actually a lot of activity between these two in 2004. One of the things that was seized from Jeffrey Epstein's home during that initial investigation to him in the mid-2000s were message pads. And on those message pads, there were 2, if you look here, 2 messages from Donald Trump in November of 2004. This is around the time the two of them actually were competing to buy a property.
Women who have testified under oath facing penalty of perjury have described how Epstein transported them to Trump's properties. These aren't allegations whispered anonymously to tabloids. These are legal depositions, the kind of testimony that puts people in prison. The evidence gets even more serious when you look at the criminal trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime accomplice and enabler.
Your review also, you looked also through tons of photos and tons of video of Trump and Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell together from Mar-a-Lago to here in Manhattan. Walk us through kind of some of those moments that you found.
Yeah, Kate, and these images, they really speak for themselves. In November 1992, there's an image that a lot of people have seen, and it's of Trump and Epstein, and they're dancing there. You can see with models. I think you can see Ghislaine Maxwell in the background if you look. She was there just a second ago. Just a year later, we had found, or previously, Epstein was at Trump's wedding in 1993. That's the photo there on the left. 1997, you can see in that photo on the right, that's them at a Victoria's Secret Angels event. And then in 1999, this that I found in some archives shows Trump and Epstein.
During that trial, a woman took the stand and testified that when she was just 14 years old, she was brought to Mar-a-Lago by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. 14. Think about that number for a moment. A child, barely a teenager, being brought to Donald Trump's private residence by two of the most notorious sex traffickers in modern history. This woman, now an adult, sat in open court and described what happened to her.
Saying about this.
So we reached out to the White House. We asked them about all of this, and it's on CNN.com. If you read the timeline, it's very extensive. They didn't respond to any of the detailed questions that we sent, but Stephen Chung, who is the communications director for the sent along a statement, said, quote, "The fact is that the president kicked him out of his club for being a creep." So it's going to be interesting to see, because he says they weren't close. He says he was not a fan, but we continue to just see more and more revelations come out.
Yeah, and we've heard that similar statement from Stephen Chung many times about questions that linger. It's great to see you. Great reporting as always. Thanks, Andrew. A key figure in the Epstein case, who later worked for President Trump, could soon be called to testify under oath.
Her testimony is part of the legal record. It's not going anywhere. Then there's the tragic story of Virginia Giuffre, who recently took her own life in Australia. Her connection to this web of exploitation traces directly back to Mar-a-Lago. Before she became one of Epstein's most vocal accusers, before she fought for justice in civil courts, she was a vulnerable young girl working at Trump's Florida estate.
And a deal that shut down the federal investigation into his alleged sex trafficking ring. Acosta then went on to serve as Trump's first-term labor secretary. For reasons unknown, Acosta, the man who would know everything about the Epstein case, was left off the House Oversight Committee's list of subpoenaed witnesses. But tonight, a Republican on that committee, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, is telling the Palm Beach Post that calling Acosta to testify is not, quote, off the table. She also says at any time he can be called to testify. I'm going to speak to the top Democrat on that committee in a moment about plans to subpoena Acosta, because even though dozens of victims had come forward at that point, Acosta, as I mentioned, let Epstein off easy, allowed him to plead guilty to just 2 prostitution-related charges.
She had been homeless before somehow landing employment at Mar-a-Lago, reportedly through some kind of family connection. And it was there, at Trump's property, that Ghislaine Maxwell spotted her. Maxwell, who functioned as Epstein's scout and recruiter and who had cultivated a friendship with Donald Trump, identified Virginia Giuffre, brought her into Epstein's orbit, and that is when the systematic exploitation began. Mar-a-Lago was effectively used as a location to identify potential victims. Let that sink in. Donald Trump's private club, his Palm Beach estate, served as a recruitment location for Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation. Ghislaine Maxwell had access. She moved through those rooms with comfort and familiarity. She knew she could find vulnerable young women there, and she was right. The documentation connecting Trump to Epstein extends far beyond witness testimony. There exists video evidence of Donald Trump socializing with Jeffrey Epstein at events together and in each other's company. Trump's name appears on Epstein's phone records, on his call logs throughout his communication history. The flight logs from Epstein's private jet, the one that reportedly transported victims to his private island and various properties, contained Trump's name as well. And the connection ran both directions. Epstein has flown on Trump's aircraft. These men moved in each other's worlds with ease and regularity. Perhaps most notable is Trump's own words about Epstein before the scandal broke. Trump was quoted describing Epstein as a great guy, specifically adding that Epstein liked women on the younger side. When Trump said younger, the context and subsequent revelations raised serious questions about what he meant. The pattern of behavior surrounding Trump and young women forms a troubling picture when you step back and examine it. Trump organized beauty pageants specifically featuring teenage girls. He ran competitions where underage participants were paraded and judged. Following these events, there were reported parties where witnesses described concerning behavior and comments that objectified young women in deeply inappropriate terms. Trump hosted something called the Look of the Year competition, which essentially functioned as a showcase for underage girls. Trump's own children were brought into Epstein's social orbit, spending time with a man who would later be exposed as one of history's most prolific sex offenders. The normalization of this relationship is staggering in retrospect. What does that tell you about the nature of their friendship? All of this information exists in the public domain right now. You can verify it independently. The documentation, the testimony, the flight records, the phone logs. This isn't hidden information requiring special access. It's available for anyone willing to look. But here's where the story takes an even more significant turn. There's an entire additional universe of files that remain concealed from public view. The D-174 files represent just one category of documents that could illuminate exactly what Trump did and what he knew. If anyone genuinely wanted to investigate Trump's relationship with Epstein, the document requests would be straightforward. Release the D-174 files. Provide all communications related to these matters. Make public the grand jury testimony of the witness who testified at the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. That testimony alone could contain a wealth of evidence connecting Trump to Epstein more directly than anything we've seen so far. The amount of evidence already available that links these two men together is substantial enough to warrant serious investigation. Adding the sealed and redacted material would likely paint a picture that explains why so many people are suddenly backpedaling on their transparency promises. Remember the grand promises? Trump and the broader MAGA apparatus swore they would release the Epstein files. This was going to be the moment of truth. Anna Paulina Luna, the Republican congresswoman, made a very public commitment that the files would be released. She positioned herself as a champion of transparency, someone who would finally give the American people the answers they had been demanding. But then something happened. When the moment arrived to actually deliver, the story changed dramatically. Luna posted a statement expressing frustration and disappointment. She claimed that neither she nor the task force had been given access to the Epstein documents being released. She complained that a New York Post story had revealed the documents being offered were nothing more than Epstein's phone book, material that had already been available for years. She called it a complete disappointment, explicitly stating this was not what the American people had asked for. This was the moment when the bait and switch became unmistakable. Remember the moment with the right-wing influencers? They were brought out holding binders, triumphantly declaring they had obtained the Epstein files. What they were actually holding was a phone log, information that had been publicly available for many years. The same phone log that contains Donald Trump's name appearing repeatedly throughout its pages. The real Epstein files are not mysterious or impossibly difficult to locate. Anyone with internet access can find them at vault.fbi.gov. They exist on government servers. The catch is that these documents are heavily redacted, with black bars obscuring names, locations, and details that would reveal the full scope of connections and criminal activity. The solution is straightforward. Remove the redactions. The documents are already there. The information already exists in government custody. All that's required is the political will to make them fully public. Tens of thousands of pages from civil cases and criminal investigations related to Jeffrey Epstein and his network are waiting to be made available. The question isn't where the files are. It's why those in power refuse to release them. Against this backdrop of broken promises and deliberate evasion, Lauren Boebert recently gave an interview that managed to be both unusual and inadvertently revealing. Appearing on Blaze TV's primetime program, Boebert addressed the Epstein files in a manner that raised more questions than it answered. She expressed support for releasing the complete list of names connected to Epstein's network, which sounds promising until you listen to where she went next. She immediately began laying groundwork for excuses, suggesting the files might have been tampered with, implying that the information could have been altered or corrupted over the years. Let's examine what Boebert actually said during this interview. She questioned what people expected to see in the files, suggesting that graphic physical evidence was not going to be released, and that she had no interest in viewing such material anyway. She then pivoted to wondering aloud what was really there to see, as if the value of the files was somehow questionable. Her co-interviewer had to redirect her, pointing out that what people actually wanted was simply the list. The names of individuals connected to Epstein's network. Boebert agreed, stating she wanted to see what names appeared and understand why they were there, acknowledging that this should transcend partisan politics. But then the excuses started flowing. She speculated about whether the previous administration had destroyed files. She mentioned rumors of thousands of hours of video footage that needed review. She praised Trump's declassification efforts while simultaneously questioning what had happened to information over decades of government handling. She invoked the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, and John Kennedy, suggesting that documents related to those events had passed through untrustworthy hands. She framed this as justification for questioning government at all times, even while serving within the system herself as a member of Congress. The self-awareness of her next admission was striking. She acknowledged being part of the very system she was critiquing, describing how the House of Representatives operates as a majority-rule body where the rules themselves get changed to facilitate passing legislation. She then circled back to the core issue. The Epstein files and all these declassified documents have passed through hands she doesn't trust over decades. Her conclusion was that you never know what might have been removed or potentially added to these files, making absolute truth essentially impossible to determine after so many years of concealment. This is where the pre-excuse narrative really ramps up. Boebert is laying the foundation for what comes next. When the files are eventually released in some limited, redacted, or otherwise compromised form, the narrative will already be in place. The information can't be trusted because it may have been altered during its years in government custody. It's a rhetorical trap. Release damning information and it can be dismissed as fabricated. Release nothing incriminating and claim the incriminating material was destroyed or tampered with. Either way, accountability gets indefinitely deferred. The truly remarkable aspect of this moment is witnessing Lauren Boebert and Jasmine Crockett finding themselves on the same side of an issue. When ideological opposites agree, something significant is happening. Crockett recently made the pointed observation that Trump's constant controversy generation serves a very specific purpose, distracting from the Epstein files. She articulated what many observers have suspected. Trump is concerned about what full disclosure would reveal because he knows his name appears throughout these documents. The desperation to change the subject, to create new headlines, to flood the information environment with noise, all traces back to this fundamental fear. The pattern of promises followed by retreats has become unmistakable. Pam Bondi, during her time as Attorney General, dramatically claimed the Epstein files were sitting on her desk. Imminent release was coming and the wait for truth was nearly over. The posture was one of eager transparency, of an administration ready to expose everything regardless of whose reputations might suffer. But then the release date came and went. The files didn't materialize. The promises evaporated into bureaucratic statements about ongoing reviews and sensitive information requiring careful handling. The classic Washington approach: promise transparency, deliver nothing, and hope everyone forgets. The broader media ecosystem has already deployed its defense architecture. Sean Hannity dedicated substantial airtime to defending Trump regarding the Epstein connection, weaving elaborate explanations for why the former president's extensive documented relationship with a convicted sex trafficker was somehow innocent or coincidental. Charlie Kirk followed the same approach, working through talking points designed to minimize and deflect. The coordinated nature of these defenses suggests a network preparing for something bigger, building their narrative defenses before additional information potentially surfaces. Author Michael Wolff added a fascinating dimension to this story during his appearance on the Midas Touch podcast. Wolff revealed that he was once approached to serve as Epstein's official biographer. While he ultimately declined the project, the consultation process gave him extraordinary access. He recorded somewhere between 80 and 100 hours of conversations with Epstein himself. These recordings, which still exist, contain Epstein speaking extensively and in remarkable detail about his relationship with Donald Trump. Think about the evidentiary value of those recordings. Epstein, in his own voice, describing the nature of his connection to Trump, the frequency of their interactions, the context of their friendship. Those recordings represent a record of truth that someone is keeping locked away. The path forward requires creative thinking because the traditional channels have demonstrated they are not up to the task. Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia recently assumed leadership of the Oversight Committee, and this creates an opportunity. The concept of shadow hearings deserves serious consideration. Remember how these worked before? When Republicans controlled committees and refused to address legitimate concerns, Democrats held shadow hearings, public sessions where witnesses testified and evidence was presented outside the formal committee structure. The same approach could work for the Epstein and Trump connection. Bring in witnesses who possess direct knowledge. Create a forum where testimony can be heard and documented. force the conversation into the open where it belongs. The Midas Touch Network will not allow this story to fade into the background noise of the endless news cycle. The objective evidence that exists in the public record tells a story that demands further investigation. The sworn testimony, the documentary records, the flight logs and phone records, the eyewitness accounts, all of these elements converge on a deeply troubling picture of Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and his potential involvement in or knowledge of criminal activity. This isn't about partisan point scoring or political convenience. When a witness testifies under oath that she was trafficked to Mar-a-Lago by Epstein and Maxwell, the obligation to investigate transcends politics. When multiple witnesses describe Trump's properties being used as recruitment grounds for a trafficking operation, the demand for accountability becomes universal. When a man who ran beauty pageants for teenage girls who spoke warmly about his friendship with a convicted sex offender, when that man ascends to the most powerful office in the world, the public has an absolute right to know the full truth about his past. Search the public records. Verify every claim independently. If anything presented here is inaccurate, fact-check it. The information exists for anyone willing to look beyond the carefully managed narratives and the endless distraction cycles. The Epstein files are sitting in government custody, redacted but intact, waiting for someone with the courage to remove those black bars and let the American people see what their government has been hiding. The question isn't whether the evidence exists. It's whether the political establishment will ever allow it to see the light of day. And here at the Midas Touch Network, we're going to keep pushing until we get answers.